Jim Carrey has been honored at France's Cesar Awards, and, well, he's apologizing now for his poor French. Experts say Jim Carrey's change in appearance makes sense.
In February 2026, Jim cried on stage in Paris and named the people he loved for the first time in 30 years during a live broadcast. The whole room stood, but nobody reported it. Instead, the internet spent that week convinced he was a fake. What was Jim really saying while the world looked away? And why did the truth get buried? Join us as we find out what Jim Carrey said when he finally broke his silence. The career that built a cage. In 1994, Jim released 3 films in a single year: Ace Ventura in February, The Mask in July, Dumb and Dumber in December. All 3 made enormous amounts of money. All 3 worked the same way, a physically extreme, high-energy comedy style that no one else in Hollywood was doing at that level. Studios paid attention fast. By 1996, he had become the first actor to earn $20 million per film. The industry wanted more of exactly that formula, and for a stretch, he kept delivering it. The 3 1994 films produced numbers the industry had not seen from a single performer in a single year. Ace Ventura cost $15 million to make and returned over $100 million worldwide. The Mask cost $23 million and returned $350 million. Dumb and Dumber cost $17 million and returned $247 million. All 3 finished in the top 10 highest-grossing films of that year. No other performer that year appeared in even 2 films that reached that level. Jim did it 3 times before December, but Jim had no interest in repeating the same thing indefinitely. In 1998, he took the lead in The Truman Show, a film that stripped away every tool that had made him famous. He played a man slowly discovering his entire life had been staged as a television show. The critics responded positively. The Academy nominated the film in multiple categories. Jim was not among them. He talked about that omission in interviews for years afterward, and never sounded settled about it. The following year pushed further. Man on the Moon asked him to become the late comedian Andy Kaufman completely, not just perform him but stay in character for the entire production. Cast and crew reported that Jim essentially stopped showing up as himself during that shoot. Andy Kaufman was always there instead. The film received serious critical attention. The Academy said nothing again. Jim made no effort to pretend that the second silence was easy. The 2000 brought mixed results, but Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind stood apart. Directed by Michel Gondry, it was a quiet, emotionally exposed film about erasing a painful relationship from memory. Jim Carrey delivered one of the most restrained and demanding performances of his career, earning a BAFTA Award nomination and winning a Golden Globe Award for his earlier dramatic work, yet still receiving no Oscar nomination. By then, the pattern was hard to ignore. Each time he offered something serious, Academy Awards recognition didn't follow. By the 10,000s, Jim had become genuinely hard to read in public. In interviews, he would shift without warning, launching into voices, building characters, then suddenly dropping everything and speaking with complete plainness. Journalists who spent time with him often left unsure which version they had actually encountered. A television role in the early 2020s shifted things. He played a beloved children's television host who was privately falling apart. The press around it gave him a different kind of interview space, and he used it in a way he never had before. He spoke directly about depression. He talked about grief. He described what 30 years of high-volume performing had cost him personally, with no character to stand behind and nothing to retreat into. In 2022, he told a journalist he was finished. He described a quieter life, painting, a personal practice, and silence, and said he had no remaining interest in chasing what the industry had consistently refused to give him. He said it simply, and the lack of any performance around it made it easy to believe. 2 years later, he returned to play Dr. Robotnik in Sonic the Hedgehog 3, continuing the role he had taken on in the earlier films of the franchise. When asked what changed his mind about coming back, Jim Carrey didn't dress it up. He said he'd bought a lot of things and needed the money. At first, people laughed. Then it lingered, because from someone at his level, that kind of honesty is rare, and it sounded more real than what most celebrities usually say in front of cameras. Jim's Hall of Fame speech revealed a changed man, but what was he really heading toward in Paris? The last time anyone saw him. The Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction ceremony took place in Los Angeles in November 2025. Soundgarden was being inducted that night. The band had a long list of people who could have delivered their induction speech. They specifically asked Jim. The connection between Jim and Soundgarden went back almost 30 years to a single night in 1996. He was preparing to host Saturday Night Live for the first time and pushed hard during negotiations to get Soundgarden booked as the musical guest.
I especially remember myself as a kid singing to the music on my transistor radio.
He was specific about wanting them, and the booking came through. During their rehearsals at Rockefeller Plaza, he stood directly in front of the stage and watched the full set from a few feet away. After the broadcast that night, the band handed him the Fender Telecaster that Chris Cornell had played on air. Every member had signed it. Jim kept that guitar in his home from that day forward and described it in interviews as one of the most personally meaningful objects he owned. Chris died in May 2017 while Soundgarden was on tour. The band never toured again. The November 2025 ceremony was the first time the surviving members, Kim Thayil, Matt Cameron, Ben Shepherd, and original bassist Hiro Yamamoto, had been in the same room together since that night. Hiro had not appeared publicly with the band in years and traveled to Los Angeles specifically for the evening. Chris's daughter Lily spoke from the stage. The ceremony carried specific weight beyond the induction itself. Chris died on May 18, 2017 in Detroit, midway through a Soundgarden concert. He was 52. The cause was ruled suicide. The band canceled the remainder of their tour that night and never rescheduled. In the 8 years between that night and the November 2025 ceremony, the surviving members had not shared a stage. Kim had made occasional public appearances. Matt continued drumming with other projects. Ben had largely stepped back from public life. The Hall of Fame evening was the first time all four had been in the same room since Detroit. Brandi Carlile, Taylor Momsen, Mike McCready, and Jerry Cantrell all performed. The full weight of the Seattle music community came together to close something that had been open for 8 years. Jim's speech opened with a joke. He asked out loud why a band with Soundgarden standing would want a comedian delivering their induction. He wondered whether the Spoon Man had simply not been available. The room responded immediately. He had them before the speech turned serious. Then it did. He talked about Chris the way a person speaks about someone they genuinely knew and genuinely lost. Specific, undecorated, with none of the ceremony language that usually fills those kinds of speeches. He described what Chris's voice did to a room, not in broad terms, but in concrete ones. He described standing 3 feet from the stage in 1996 and feeling that sound go through him physically. He talked about what a person sees when they look directly into the eyes of someone rare, someone whose presence carries far more weight than a single person normally holds. He did not perform any of this. He stood at the podium and said what he meant in front of a room that already understood the weight of the occasion. Nothing was operating as a buffer between him and the audience. Jim had spent most of his public career with some kind of layer between himself and a room, a character, a volume setting, a set of tools he could reach for if needed.
While no one knows the full story, it's a good time to come together and appreciate the best moments from his incredible career.
None of that was present at the Hall of Fame podium. He was 63 years old, talking about loss and music, and a guitar he had kept for 29 years, with no performance register in sight. The room received it genuinely. Jim arrived carrying something deeply personal to say, but who was about to make sure no one heard it? Paris chose him. The Cesar Awards are France's equivalent of the Oscars. They are the defining annual event for the French film industry, attended by the people who run it, and the honorary César goes to one international figure per year whose body of work has genuinely shaped cinema. Julia Roberts received it the year before Jim, Clint Eastwood the year before her. The distinction is not handed out casually. The César Awards were founded in 1976, modeled directly on the Academy Awards, and have been the defining measure of distinction in French cinema for 5 decades. The Olympia Theatre, where the 51st ceremony was held, is one of the oldest and most significant performance venues in Paris, having hosted Edith Piaf, Jacques Brel, and the Beatles across its history. The honorary César has been presented since 1975. Previous recipients include Clint Eastwood, Julia Roberts, Meryl Streep, and Quentin Tarantino. Jim was among a small number of performers from outside Europe ever to receive it, and the first Canadian in the award's history. The invitation to Jim had been in development since the previous summer, 8 full months before the ceremony took place. The organization's general delegate, Gregory, later confirmed to journalists that from the very first exchange, Jim had been visibly moved by the invitation. He treated the commitment seriously from that first contact and never treated it otherwise across the entire preparation period. What followed over those 8 months was unusual. Most recipients attend the ceremony, accept the award, say a few words in English, thank the audience, and leave. Jim did not take that approach. He reached out to Gregory multiple times across the preparation period, specifically to work on his speech. He was learning French, not memorizing a phonetically written text, but actually working on the language itself. He asked Gregory about the correct pronunciation of specific words. He kept returning with new questions about particular sounds he was struggling with. He identified the parts that were hardest for him and worked on them repeatedly over months. That level of preparation was consistent and sustained across the entire 8 months. For a man who had told a journalist in 2022 that he was done with public life entirely, this was not a small step. Paris was the first time in years Jim had chosen to say something genuinely personal in front of a camera, and he had spent 8 months deciding exactly how to say it. The decision to speak in French was a deliberate act of respect toward the room and the institution. The people in that theater had spent their entire careers working in French cinema. Addressing them in their own language, however imperfectly, was a choice about what the invitation meant to him personally. He wanted to honor what it represented, not simply receive what it offered. The 51st Cesar ceremony was held on February 26, 2026, at the Olympia Theatre in central Paris. Jim arrived on the red carpet in an all-black tuxedo. His hair was noticeably longer than any recent photograph had shown, down to his shoulders, parted at the center, giving him a visibly different silhouette from the version most people held in memory. His face appeared fuller and smoother than in his most recent public appearances. Under the Olympia's stage lighting, photographs of his eyes showed them reading lighter than the darker hazel familiar from images taken decades earlier. He offered one brief, playful line to a reporter on the carpet, smiled, and walked inside. He was not there for the press. The footage of his arrival reached social media within the hour. What started as comments that he looked different became something much larger, much faster than the observation warranted. Screenshots from decades earlier were placed beside the new photographs. Point-by-point comparisons began circulating. Eye color, face shape, the overall silhouette. Someone noted that a photograph from decades earlier showed a different eye color than what appeared in the new footage. That single detail was presented not as a question worth examining, but as confirmed evidence of something impossible. Within hours, the observation had become a theory. Within a day, the theory had structure and a large audience treating it as a fact. The algorithms on every major platform did what they always do with content, generating high engagement, and they showed it to more people. The conspiracy was growing at speed, and it had not yet found the one piece of content that would send it completely out of control. While millions built a fake story online, Jim's real truth sat completely unheard. But what happened next? The internet breaks. The eye color comparisons arrived first and spread the fastest. Screenshots from photographs taken decades apart appeared side by side, presenting the visual difference as biological proof of something impossible. The posts did not mention that different camera technology, different lighting conditions, the passage of 30 years, and the specific characteristics of stage lighting all affect how eye color appears in photographs. They presented the difference as a fact that required an extreme explanation. Then came the detail that locked the whole thing in place. Someone posted video footage claiming it showed Jim signing autographs with his right hand, alongside older footage that supposedly proved he was left-handed. The claim spread across multiple platforms within hours and was cited everywhere it landed as hard, definitive evidence. Nobody checked whether the camera angle had horizontally flipped the image. Nobody verified whether the original handedness claim was even accurate. The detail looked verified. In the environment that had already formed, that was sufficient. By the end of the first full day, the conversation had shifted completely. People were no longer asking whether something might be wrong. They were explaining what had happened, describing timelines, building evidence lists, and directing audiences toward the material. Conspiracy threads that had been running for years around celebrity replacement now had something current and publicly visible to anchor to. Jim's appearance gave that existing content fresh, real-world material at exactly the moment their audiences were prepared to receive it. The platform algorithms responded the way they always respond to high-engagement content. They showed it to more people. Outrage, disbelief, and alarm all generate strong engagement signals. The conspiracy content was producing all three simultaneously. Within 48 hours, it had reached audiences measured in the tens of millions. The spread followed a documented pattern specific to celebrity identity conspiracy content. Initial posts appeared on X, then migrated to TikTok within 6 hours, where the short-form video format allowed comparison clips to circulate without context. Reddit threads on multiple large forums compiled the claims into structured posts designed to look like investigative summaries. Instagram amplified the visual comparison material. Each platform's algorithm treated the high engagement as a signal to push the content further. By the end of the second day, the claim had been shared across at least 4 major platforms simultaneously, each audience reinforcing what the others had already concluded.
Jim Carrey, is that you? Because the internet's convinced it's a doppelganger or even a clone.
The specific claims circulating were never verified. The handedness accusation rested on footage nobody had examined carefully. The eye color comparisons ignored basic photographic variables. The face shape analysis treated the combined visual result of longer hair, apparent cosmetic procedures, and 3 decades of aging as biologically impossible changes that could only mean substitution. None of the differences Jim displayed on the red carpet required anything beyond what medical and cosmetic professionals would later state plainly: standard procedures that large numbers of men in their 60s choose every year. But the theory did not need accuracy. It needed a story that felt like it fit, arriving at the moment when the audience was already prepared to believe it. Jim's name needed no amplification. It was one of the most recognizable in entertainment. His changed appearance was real and easy to point out. The comparisons looked like evidence even when they were not. 2 of those 3 components were genuine. The third was not. That combination was enough. The posts looked like analysis. The comparison images looked like documentation, and large active communities treated every thread as a confirmed fact. Nothing credible pushed back fast enough to slow it down. What appeared instead was a single post from a well-known makeup and transformation artist with millions of followers, a post that looked at first glance like a full public confession. It looked like the one piece that confirmed everything the conspiracy had been building toward. The audience was primed. The algorithms were running. The post landed in exactly the environment it needed to cause maximum damage. A fabricated image was about to reach millions. But what was Jim actually saying on that same stage? The fake confession. A few days after the Cesar ceremony, Alexis Stone posted to Instagram. Alexis was a well-known British makeup artist and transformation specialist who had spent years building a serious reputation. He had published dozens of videos showing full facial reconstructions using prosthetics, custom dental veneers, and layered cosmetic applications precise enough that viewers who knew both him and the celebrities he recreated could not locate where one face ended, and the construction began. His work was genuine, and his following was large. Alexis had built his reputation over several years through videos documenting the full process of his transformations, showing the prosthetic construction, the application stages, and the finished result side by side with photographs of the person he had recreated. His most viewed videos had accumulated millions of views individually. His Instagram following at the time of the post exceeded 1 million. The level of technical detail in his previous work gave him credibility that an ordinary account would not have carried. When the post appeared, it was received not as a random claim, but as a statement from someone the audience already understood to be capable of exactly what he was describing. The post presented its central image as Alexis, in Paris, at the Olympia, performing as Jim on the night of the ceremony. Supporting images appeared to show a prosthetic face mask built to Jim's features. a custom wig styled to match the hair from the red carpet, and false teeth. Taken together with the caption, the post was constructed to be understood as a performer publicly claiming credit for having stood on that stage in place of the actual person. It spread immediately. People who had spent 2 days building the theory and convincing themselves they were right now had what appeared to be the final confirmation. Entertainment accounts with large, general interest audiences picked it up and shared it under captions treating the claim as credible. Conspiracy forums that had been running the theory all week sent their audiences directly to the post and cited it as definitive. Then the celebrities arrived, and the story crossed the last barrier between the internet's corners and the mainstream. Megan Fox wrote in the comments that she was at her absolute limit and needed someone to explain what she was seeing. Lisa Rinna posted that she was completely floored. Several more recognizable names followed with responses blending shock and apparent belief. Between them, these commenters had tens of millions of followers, people who now saw someone they recognized expressing genuine alarm about the claim. Almost nobody looked carefully at the evidence images in those first hours. When image analysts eventually did, they found significant technical problems. The central image, showing the prosthetic materials arranged in what appeared to be a Paris hotel room with the Eiffel Tower visible through the window, did not hold up as a photograph of real objects in a real physical space. The proportions of the room were wrong. The direction of light falling on the objects in the foreground did not match the direction of light visible through the window behind them. The surface texture of the prosthetic materials carried specific qualities that specialists in AI-generated imagery identified as characteristic of generated content, rather than photographed physical objects. The image had almost certainly been produced by an AI generator. It had never existed as a real photograph taken in a real location. The confession was built on something fabricated.
AI image of a face mask and teeth signaling to his 1.4 million Instagram followers it was him impersonating Jim.
Alexis later said he had not been at the ceremony and had never impersonated Jim at any point. He said the post had been misread. What he had originally intended was never fully clarified. What was clear was the outcome. One AI-generated image and one caption, amplified by celebrity responses across major platforms, had convinced a substantial portion of the global internet that a living person had been physically replaced at an internationally broadcast awards ceremony. The correction reached a fraction of the original audience. The celebrity comments were never updated. The accounts that had amplified the claim did not follow with corrections. The content was not removed. It was buried by newer material as the algorithm moved to the next story. Most people who encountered the original theory never found the debunking that existed in the public record. The fake confession reached tens of millions, but Jim's actual truth reached almost nobody. So what was it? What he actually said? Before Jim reached the podium, two people came to the stage on his behalf. Michel Gondry spoke first. He had directed Jim in Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind in 2004 and worked with him on 2 further projects since. At the Olympia podium, Michel described what that collaboration had actually required, the level of trust a director needs when material is emotionally exposed, and the film depends entirely on a performer being willing to go exactly as far as the scene demands. He talked about what Jim had brought to that work. As Michel spoke, Jim sat in the audience watching him. His eyes filled before Michel finished speaking. He did not manage how it looked. He did not tilt his head back, look away, or do anything to minimize what was visible on his face. In front of the full Olympia house, with cameras running, whatever was happening was left completely visible. Emmanuel Curtil stepped to the microphone second. For 30 years, every word Jim said on screen in France came out of Emmanuel's mouth. When he stood at that podium, he did not summarize Jim's career. He addressed Jim directly. He asked him clearly and publicly not to stop acting. He said the profession needed him. Saying that out loud at someone's own tribute ceremony to that person sitting 30 feet away from you was an unusual choice. The room heard it land. Jim accepted the award, a block of clear glass cut in the shape of the French word for square, and began to speak entirely in French. He opened by telling the room his French was barely mediocre and thanked them in advance for bearing with it. He closed by saying his tongue was completely worn out. The audience laughed from the first sentence to the last. with him, not at him. The speech contained things that had never been part of Jim's public record before. He shared the history behind his own surname. Approximately 300 years ago, his ancestor Marc-François Carré was born in the port city of Saint-Malo in Brittany and later emigrated to Canada. Over the generations that followed, the French spelling shifted into the English one. The word carré, which means square in French, became the name Carré. Jim held up his award, shaped like a square, and told the room that with this honor, the square had finally come all the way around. Maybe, he said, this was what his family had been moving toward for 3 centuries, without any of them knowing it. He thanked his daughter Jane and told her directly that he loved her. He named his grandson Jackson. He then named his partner Min Ah at a formal international broadcast event for the first time in his life, told her clearly in front of that room and that audience that he loved her, and let it stay. He closed by thanking his father, Percy, the funniest man he had ever known, and described what Percy had passed down to him: love, generosity, and laughter as the only things genuinely worth carrying from one generation to the next. He did not speak about Percy in the past tense. He addressed him the way a person speaks to someone they are still in active conversation with. The entire Olympia rose, not on cue, not prompted. The full room stood and held it. The ceremony was attended by approximately 2,400 people, the full body of the French film industry. Jim's daughter Jane had traveled from the United States. His grandson Jackson was present. 12 family members and close friends had made the trip to Paris specifically for the evening. Michel Gondry, who was born in Versailles and had maintained a close relationship with Jim since Eternal Sunshine, attended and spent time with Jim both before and after the ceremony. Jim's representative, Marlia Leslie, was present throughout the evening. Every person who spent time with Jim that night confirmed his attendance independently and on the record. The whole room stood for Jim, but why did the world outside never hear what he actually said? The truth, nobody was watching. After the ceremony, Jim Carrey left Paris and stayed silent. There were no interviews, no statement about the conspiracy, no social media reaction. He didn't address what was said about him or try to shape the narrative afterward. He appeared at the event, completed his appearance, and left without comment. The conspiracy did not resolve cleanly behind him. Alexis's post stayed on Instagram. The eye color comparison threads kept circulating. Clone and body double content built around his appearance was not corrected or removed. It was simply buried as the algorithm moved to the next story. The celebrities who had commented in apparent shock never posted updates. The accounts that had amplified the claim never followed with corrections. Most people who encountered the original theory never found the debunking that existed in the public record. The story did not end with a correction. It ended because the algorithm moved on to something else. The false story had everything it needed to survive: a famous name, a real and visible change, and one fabricated image that looked exactly like proof. Jim's appearance had changed for reasons that were not unusual in isolation. The American Society of Plastic Surgeons reported a sustained rise in men over 60 choosing cosmetic procedures in the years leading up to 2026. Between 2020 and 2024, male patient numbers rose by 29%. Brow lifts, dermal fillers, and periorbital procedures were among the most common choices in that age group. The shift reflected broader acceptance of cosmetic maintenance among older male patients rather than outliers or celebrity-specific behavior. Clinical reports noted that most procedures were elective, minimally invasive, and routine in post-60 demographics across the industry. Multiple board-certified surgeons who reviewed the available footage gave consistent assessments without being asked to reach a particular conclusion. None identified anything that required an unusual explanation. Hair length alone accounts for a significant portion of the silhouette change in men with Jim's natural hair texture and color. No part of his appearance on that red carpet fell outside the range of the ordinary. Medical and cosmetic professionals who reviewed the footage described changes consistent with a brow lift, dermal filler, and work in the eye area, the kind of procedures large numbers of men in their 60s choose every year, without it generating news coverage. His hair was longer. He was 64 years old. Those facts account for every visible difference that the conspiracy treated as biologically impossible. What was genuinely unusual, what actually warranted coverage and received almost none, was the choice Jim made about how to use that night. He could have collected the award, said something brief in English, thanked the room, and left. Nobody would have found fault with that. Instead, he spent 8 months learning a language, prepared a speech that contained things he had never made public in 30 years of public life.
Quote, he worked on his speech in French for months, asking me about the exact pronunciation of certain words.
Cried in front of the French film industry without concealing it, named his partner at an internationally broadcast event for the first time, traced his surname back 3 centuries to explain why a glass square in Paris was the end point of something 300 years in the making, and addressed his dead father in the present tense, the way a person speaks to someone they are still in conversation with. The public version of Jim, built in 1994 and kept in place by collective memory ever since, is a genuine historical fact. It has not been the complete picture for a long time. By February 2026, it had very little to do with the man who actually stood at the Olympia podium. The internet spent the week looking for the 1994 version. When it did not find him, it read the absence as a substitution. The actual man was standing in full view the entire time. Almost nobody wrote about it. If the most honest moment of Jim's career happened in Paris in 2026, what does that say about what audiences really want from him? And if someone made a film about the man he is now, not the 1994 version, would people even show up to watch it? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.